I never thought I'd see the day my own husband would look me in the eyes and call me insane, not just to me, but to everyone we knew. He said it so calmly, so convincingly, that for a while even I started to wonder if maybe I really was losing my mind. But the truth he was hiding, the truth that night would expose in front of everyone, was darker than anything I could have imagined. That kind of betrayal doesn't explode out of nowhere. It's built quietly, piece by piece, like a slow leak that drowns you before you realize the floor is underwater. Daniel wasn't a monster in the beginning. He was the man who brought me coffee at dawn, kissed my forehead before work, texted me in the middle of meetings just to say he missed me. That version of him still haunted me, because I couldn't tell when he disappeared and the stranger took his place. It started small: the missed calls, the work dinners, the faint perfume clinging to his shirt that wasn't mine. When I asked, he laughed. "You're imagining things again, babe." His voice was always soft, steady, reasonable, the tone people use with someone fragile. That was his weapon. He never raised his voice, never lost control. He didn't have to. At first I tried to fight back logically. I checked receipts, tracked mileage, asked direct questions. Every time he turned it around: "You're paranoid. You've been stressed. You need help." Each word chipped away at me until I wasn't sure what was real anymore. Even my friends started looking at me differently. Sympathetic, cautious, as if they were trying not to trigger the crazy woman my husband described behind my back. One night I heard him on the phone in the hallway. His tone was low, intimate, too gentle for anyone but me, or so I thought. When I stepped closer, he lowered his voice and said, "She's getting suspicious." I froze. Every instinct screamed to confront him, but I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I walked back to bed, lay there staring at the ceiling, and made a promise to myself. I wouldn't accuse him again. I'd prove it. So I started recording. Just small things at first. Phone calls, late-night whispers, the way he'd mutter a woman's name in his sleep. Each clip was a puzzle piece, and together they painted a picture of a man I didn't know. The calm mask he wore, the lies told with practiced warmth. It was surgical. By day, he was the perfect husband. By night, he was someone else entirely. Then came the dinner, the one that changed everything. It was his idea, of course. "We should host," he said, smiling like the old days. "Remind everyone how good we are." His tone was light, his hand brushing my shoulder like nothing had ever fractured between us. But his eyes gave him away. Empty, calculating. I knew he wanted an audience. He always needed one. That morning I cleaned the house until my hands shook, polished the glasses, ironed the napkins, even arranged candles the way he liked. Symmetry, control, perfection. It wasn't for him, though. It was for me. The performance had to be flawless because the finale would be unforgettable. As I cooked, I listened again to the recording. His voice, low and unmistakable, whispering things that made my stomach twist. Her name, her laugh, the plans they made while I sat home wondering why he didn't answer. I listened not to hurt myself, but to numb myself, to turn pain into fuel. By the time the guests arrived, my smile was fixed in place. Laughter filled the house, glasses clinked, and Daniel played the doting husband. Every gesture rehearsed, every compliment another blade disguised as kindness. He leaned in to whisper something in my ear, and I caught the faintest trace of that same perfume again, the same one I'd smelled weeks ago. That was when I decided it would end tonight. No more questioning, no more doubt, just truth, raw and undeniable. I moved like clockwork through the evening, pouring wine, clearing plates, pretending to listen while the room buzzed with comfort and trust. And all the while, the small phone on the sideboard blinked faintly, recording every word, every smug joke, every little lie. He thought he was untouchable. That's the problem with men like him. They mistake composure for control, but control is fragile. One wrong move, one truth revealed at the wrong time, and it all burns. He didn't know it yet, but the match was already lit. And when the fire finally reached him, everyone at that table would see exactly who he really was. The air inside our house that night felt too polished, too rehearsed. Every light was perfectly dimmed, every candle flickering in rhythm with the low jazz humming from the speakers. Daniel had always been obsessed with appearances, how the wine label faced outward, how the napkins folded just so. He believed if everything looked perfect, no one would ever notice the cracks underneath. For years, that illusion worked. Until tonight. He moved through the living room with the confidence of a man admired, pouring drinks, laughing easily, his hand resting lightly on my back as if claiming ownership. Friends watched us with that lazy envy people reserve for couples who seemed to have it all. They didn't see the way my shoulders stiffened under his touch, or the way his eyes darted toward his phone each time it vibrated in his pocket. When the doorbell rang, he grinned. Too wide, too quick. "Can you get that, sweetheart?" The word tasted sour coming from him. I forced a smile and opened the door. Standing there was her. I didn't know it yet, at least not officially, but every nerve in my body recognized her before my brain did. Let's say her name was Rachel. She was one of Daniel's colleagues, supposedly there to discuss a new client. Her beauty was sharp, deliberate, the kind that announces itself before she even speaks. Her perfume matched the one that haunted my clothes. I smiled so hard my jaw ached. "You must be Rachel. Daniel's told me about you." She laughed softly. "All good things, I hope." "Always," I said, though something in me cracked at the word. Dinner unfolded like theater. Rachel sat opposite me, Daniel beside her. They exchanged glances too quickly, too easily. A brush of fingers when they passed the wine bottle. A laugh that lasted a beat too long. None of it screamed affair. It whispered it, carefully, behind polite conversation and candlelight. Every minute felt like walking barefoot on glass. My hands trembled each time I lifted my glass. I kept telling myself, "Stay still. Don't react. Not yet." I needed them to feel safe, to believe I was blind. They'd think they were winning, and that arrogance would make their fall spectacular. "Linda," one of the guests said, dragging me back to the moment. "You've been so quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Daniel answered before I could open my mouth. "She's just been stressed lately," he said, chuckling. "A little too much imagination, right, honey?" Quote. The room laughed politely. I smiled too, because that's what you do when your husband publicly rewrites your sanity for entertainment. Inside, though, something in me shifted. A small, precise click, like a trigger being pulled. I excused myself to the kitchen, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The scent of roasted rosemary chicken and warm bread hit me like a wall. I leaned on the counter, breathing through the tremor in my hands. On the table beside me, the phone I'd hidden earlier blinked softly, recording every word from the dining room. Through the muffled chatter, I heard Daniel again, his voice lower now, intimate. "Don't worry, she won't suspect a thing," he said, followed by Rachel's faint laugh. The recording caught it all, the proof, the betrayal, the final confirmation that I hadn't imagined any of it. I stood there, my reflection fractured in the dark kitchen window. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was calculating, calm, cold. I wiped my hands, fixed my hair, and stepped back toward the table. When I entered the room, the laughter died down for a second. Maybe they saw something in my face, something sharp enough to slice through the pretense. Daniel reached for my hand, his voice smooth as ever. "You okay, sweetheart?" I smiled. Perfect. It's strange, the quiet that settles right before everything collapses. That was the silence sitting between us, heavy and electric. I let it linger, because the truth was already in the room. It just hadn't been heard yet. Before everything went wrong, Daniel and I were the couple people used as proof that love could survive adulthood. We met in grad school, two ambitious people who thought late-night takeout and shared ambitions counted as chemistry. He was charming in that quiet, deliberate way, the kind of man who remembered everyone's coffee order and made you feel seen without saying much. I mistook precision for sincerity. Back then, we lived in a small apartment that always smelled of burnt toast and freshly printed documents. I worked in marketing. He was climbing fast in corporate finance. We didn't have much, but it felt like enough. We used to joke that our love could outlast any recession. He'd wrap his arms around me and whisper, "We'll build something real." I believed him. For a while, he did too. The first crack came wrapped in success. His promotion turned our kitchen table into a battlefield of unread emails, cold coffee, and phone calls that bled into midnight. He said it was temporary, just a busy quarter. But the busyness never ended. The more he earned, the less he came home as himself. He began dressing sharper, speaking in corporate slogans, and laughing at jokes I didn't understand anymore. At first, I tried to keep up. I joined him at dinners, networking events, the kind of glossy rooms that smell like ambition and expensive deceit. Everyone adored him there. His colleagues, the women who lingered too long at the table, the men who envied his smooth confidence. I stood beside him, smiling, proud, pretending not to notice how easily he forgot to introduce me. It was at one of those dinners that I first saw the look, the one that told me I was no longer the person at the center of his attention. He was across the table, listening to a younger consultant talk about a new campaign, and for a second, his entire expression softened. I knew that look. It used to be mine. He brushed it off when I asked later, "You're being sensitive." Quote. Then, after a pause, "You've been overthinking a lot lately. You need to relax." The words didn't sound cruel. They sounded caring. That's what made them lethal. It's easy to fight someone who yells at you. Harder when they make you doubt your own perception. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment he planted the seed. That slow, quiet narrative that I was unstable, emotional, unreliable. A story he could later use as a shield. Months passed, and the rhythm between us shifted. He started correcting the way I told stories in front of friends, interrupting me mid-sentence with a patient smile. "That's not quite how it happened, is it, honey?" Every time, the room would laugh, and I'd laugh too, pretending not to feel the sting. It's remarkable how quickly humiliation can blend into habit. One evening, after one of those parties, he came home smelling like unfamiliar perfume. I remember standing in the hallway, watching him slip off his tie. "Who were you with?" He didn't even look up. "You're doing this again?" "This what?" Creating drama out of nothing. And that was it. No fight, no confrontation, just dismissal. He made me feel like a child, poking shadows in the dark. I spent the night replaying every moment, every scent, every glance, wondering if I was, in fact, losing touch with reality. The next morning he left early, and on the kitchen counter was a note. "Dinner tonight. Don't be late, and maybe wear that blue dress. I miss that one." I stared at the handwriting, the tenderness of it, and felt a sharp confusion. How can the same person bruise you and comfort you in the same breath? That's how they win, not through cruelty, but inconsistency. That evening, he brought flowers. We laughed, we ate, and for a few hours, the world righted itself again. That's how the cycle stays alive, through those moments of almost. But even then, I remember the faint tremor under the surface, the way his eyes flicked to his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, the careful distance in his embrace. He was building a story, and I was the unreliable narrator inside it. What I didn't know was that somewhere in the background, his lies were already taking root in the minds of our friends, our families. By the time I discovered how deep they went, it was already too late to undo the damage. The cracks had formed, they just hadn't split open yet. Daniel had a talent for looking sincere. He didn't lie clumsily or panic when confronted. He performed honesty. That was his art form. And people adored him for it. The neighbors loved how he always helped carry their groceries. His colleagues admired his, quote, steady presence. My own friends told me I was lucky to have someone so patient, so composed. None of them realized that calm can be a weapon when it's used to erase your truth. At first, I still believed the image. I'd wake early, make coffee, watch him knot his tie, and tell myself this was just a rough patch. He'd smile, kiss my cheek, and say, "You worry too much." It sounded affectionate, but the subtext was clear. You're the problem. I kept thinking that if I just stayed calm, stayed loving, things would return to normal. but normal had already been replaced by the mask he wore so effortlessly. The transformation was subtle. He began telling small lies in public, details of stories slightly altered, moments rewritten to make me look forgetful or dramatic. "Remember, honey, you got that wrong again." Quote. Each correction landed like a pinprick, harmless on its own, but over time they bled me dry. Then came the social distancing. Not physical, but reputational. Friends stopped inviting me to gatherings as often. When I called, their tone felt different, polite, careful. I didn't understand why until a mutual friend accidentally let it slip. Daniel had mentioned he was worried about me, that I'd been struggling emotionally. My hands went cold. He was rewriting me behind my back, one sympathetic conversation at a time. It was masterful, in a horrifying way. He didn't call me crazy outright. He simply planted the idea. "She's been off lately," he'd say with a sigh. "Stress, I think." It sounded like concern. Concern earns trust, and trust gives lies oxygen. I started keeping track, small, invisible records of how he operated. The day he forgot to mention that he'd gone to lunch with Rachel. The night he deleted his call logs after midnight. The way he silenced his notifications whenever he came home. Still, every time I questioned him, he'd twist it with that quiet authority that made me doubt myself. "Linda, you're imagining patterns that aren't there." "But I heard." "You think you heard. You've been tired lately." The pity in his eyes was worse than anger. It made me feel unstable in my own skin. By winter, the version of me that existed in our social circle was unrecognizable. People started treating me like a fragile ornament, something to handle gently with nervous smiles. Once, at a dinner party, I caught a guest giving Daniel a pitying look and whispering, "She seems better tonight." I wanted to scream. Instead, I refilled my wine glass and smiled. That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror, studying the woman staring back. I looked fine. Too fine. A polished stranger. That was the first night I hid a small voice recorder inside my nightstand drawer. If reality could be rewritten with words, then words could also prove the truth. Over the following weeks, I listened to every conversation differently, measured pauses, suspicious laughter, subtle exchanges that used to seem meaningless. I noticed how Rachel's name appeared in sentences where it didn't belong. "She's just helping out," he'd say. "She's great with details." His phone would buzz, and he'd smile, that secretive smile that never reached his eyes. He underestimated how much you can learn by staying quiet. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation. One evening, while he was showering, his phone lit up on the counter. The preview flashed a message that made my throat tighten. "Rachel, can't wait to see you tonight. Missed you all day." I took a photo of the screen. My hands were steady. That's how I knew something inside me had changed. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I just saved the evidence and went on with the night. When he came out, towel around his waist, humming, he found me sitting on the bed, smiling faintly. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said. The same word he'd used to describe us for years. After that, I moved differently, quiet, deliberate, watching his every move as if I were learning a dangerous animal's routine. Because by then, the mask had started to slip. Tiny fractures, hesitations, guilt disguised as kindness. He thought he was still in control. He had no idea he was already living in the story I was writing, one that would end the moment I hit play. It didn't happen in a grand explosion. The beginning of his downfall came quietly, almost politely. One small mistake, the kind only someone arrogant enough to feel untouchable would make. He'd been so careful, so deliberate, so certain of his control. And then, one night, a single slip of the tongue turned his perfect lie into something bleeding. He was pacing the living room, still dressed in his work clothes, tie loosened, shirt unbuttoned, just enough to look tired but put together. I'd cooked dinner, the same routine as always. He was talking on the phone when I heard it, her name. "Rachel, I told you I can't tonight. She's here." He froze, realizing his mistake, and glanced toward me. For a second, time stalled. His eyes darted, calculating, assessing whether he could talk his way out again. Then came the recovery. A quick laugh, a shake of the head. "Work call," he said lightly. "Client stuff. You know how she gets." The lie was so immediate, so casual that it almost sounded true. Almost. I didn't respond. I just watched him. His shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the faint tremor in his left hand. He wasn't calm. He was performing calm. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of exposure. Later that night, when he went to shower, I played back the voice memo I'd secretly recorded. His tone changed mid-sentence. Warm, intimate, familiar. It was the voice he used with me years ago, back when his affection was real. Hearing it again, used for someone else, felt like standing in the ruins of my own home. But under the hurt, there was something colder, sharper. Strategy. The next day, I decided to stop reacting and start planning. I bought a second phone, unregistered, untraceable. It wasn't to spy, it was to document every conversation, every inconsistency, every shift in tone. I created a timeline, a pattern. Gaslighters rely on chaos. They make you doubt your memory, but evidence doesn't forget. At work, he was thriving. His colleagues adored him. His boss called him dependable. The irony burned. When I joined him at a corporate event a week later, I saw her again. Rachel. She was wearing the same perfume, the same careful smile, pretending she barely knew him. But the body doesn't lie. Their eyes met too easily. Their laughter fell into rhythm. He introduced me as my beautiful wife, Linda, with a proud hand on my shoulder. I felt it, that subtle grip, like he was pressing me into the mold he'd built. I smiled for the cameras, the colleagues, the image. But inside, I was documenting every gesture, every glance, every signal between them. When we got home, he was in high spirits, humming as he poured himself a drink. "You did great tonight," he said. "Everyone said we looked solid again." Solid again. As if our marriage were a marketing campaign that just needed rebranding. "Glad to know we still look believable," I said. He paused, half smiling. "Believable?" "Convincing," I corrected. "You're good at that." For a split second, his composure flickered. The barest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then it was gone. "You really need to stop twisting everything," he said, sipping his drink. "You're doing it again." I laughed softly. "Maybe I am." He didn't know that my laughter wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Let him think I'd given up. Let him relax. People reveal themselves when they think they've already won. Over the following days, I stopped challenging him entirely. I smiled, nodded, agreed. He mistook it for defeat. But behind that smile, I was building an archive. Call logs, messages, receipts. I even found an old pair of earrings under the passenger seat of his car. Not mine. Silver hoops. Small enough to be forgotten by someone who thought she'd never be caught. I placed them in a drawer with the rest of the proof. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was armor. And then came his second mistake. He invited Rachel to another dinner. This time, a work dinner. Just the three of us and a few clients. When I hesitated, he laughed. "Come on, it'll be fun. She's harmless." I said yes, not because I wanted to go, but because that was the night the universe handed me exactly what I needed. Halfway through the evening, his phone buzzed. He reached for it too fast. The screen flashed a message. "Rachel, I can't stop thinking about last night." He slammed it face down on the table, pretending nothing happened. But I'd seen enough. And worse for him, he saw in my eyes that I had. That was the moment he truly slipped. Not when he said her name, not when he lied, but when he realized I'd stopped being the confused wife and started becoming the quiet threat. From that point forward, the balance shifted. He just didn't know it yet. After that night, something shifted between us. He didn't know it, but the ground beneath him had started to move. His tone changed first, still sweet, still polite, but edged with the faint irritation of a man realizing his puppet wasn't obeying the strings. He'd ask questions he never used to care about: where I was going, who I was meeting, why I'd been so quiet. It was almost funny. The man who once treated me like an accessory suddenly wanted control back. Control is always what liars crave most when they feel it slipping. I started waking earlier than him, moving through the house like a ghost. There was power in silence. It made him uneasy. One morning he came downstairs to find me sitting at the table sipping coffee, the same phone I used for recordings lying near my hand. He froze for half a second before pretending not to notice. "You're up early," he said, voice casual. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. "Too much on my mind." He nodded slowly. "You've been tense lately. Maybe talk to someone?" There it was again, his favorite dagger disguised as care. I smiled without warmth. "Maybe I will." He stared at me a beat too long, sensing something he couldn't name. The silence stretched between us like glass ready to shatter. By mid-March, the perfect husband act was showing strain. He forgot small things: deleting messages, clearing his calendar, hiding receipts. His stories no longer lined up. Once, he claimed he had a meeting at 7, but his phone location, yes, I had learned how to track it, showed him at a hotel 2 districts away. I didn't confront him, not yet. I wanted him comfortable enough to make a bigger mistake. The world outside still thought we were fine. At brunches, we played our roles: the loving couple, trading jokes, brushing hands across the table. Friends complimented our chemistry. He'd laugh and say, "We've had our rough patches, but we're stronger now." Each time I bit back a smile. He didn't realize the performance had switched leads. Then came the day he slipped again. Subtle, devastating. I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Only this time, it wasn't Rachel's name that appeared. It was R, an initial. He'd started saving her under a single letter. Clever, if I hadn't already seen through the trick. The message read, "Miss you already." My hands went still. The folded shirt in my lap blurred until it looked like static. I took a breath, steadied myself, and snapped a picture of the screen, another piece for the archive. That night, I cooked his favorite dinner: roast chicken, rosemary, lemon zest. He walked in, loosened his tie, kissed my temple. "You're full of surprises," he said, smiling. "You have no idea," I thought. Over dinner, he started talking about our future: vacations, new furniture, even the possibility of starting fresh. It was surreal, hearing him paint a picture of domestic bliss with the same mouth that whispered to someone else. I played along, nodding at the right moments, laughing softly. But inside, every word etched itself deeper into the wall I was building between us. Afterward, he went upstairs to shower. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the dim reflection of the chandelier in my wineglass. My phone buzzed, an automatic file backup from my recorder. The last clip had finished uploading. His voice filled the quiet. "She's starting to suspect again, but she won't do anything. She never does." Rachel's laugh followed. "Then stop worrying. She's too scared to lose you." A pause. Then his answer, soft, confident. "She's already lost me." That sentence split something open. There it was, the confession he'd never meant me to hear. And for the first time in months, I felt nothing. No tears, no shaking. Just the hollow calm of someone whose pain has burned itself out. From that moment, the plan stopped being theoretical. It became real. I began organizing every recording, every photo, every screenshot into neat digital folders, dated, labeled, encrypted. I wanted to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. I wasn't just preparing to confront him, I was preparing to expose him. Still, he kept up the act. On weekends, he brought me flowers. On weekdays, he texted from late meetings. Sometimes he even called to check in, pretending affection. The performance was flawless again, almost, but the eyes always give it away. His were restless now, darting, haunted by the faint suspicion that the story he'd written about me was starting to unravel. And he was right. Because soon the woman he'd painted as unstable would become the one thing he couldn't control, the witness to his own destruction. And when the curtain finally fell, he wouldn't just lose me. He'd lose the illusion of being the good man everyone thought he was. When people talk about revenge, they imagine chaos, broken glass, screaming matches, dramatic exits. They never picture silence. But silence is what makes revenge powerful. It's patient. It listens, it learns, and by the time it moves, it's already won. After hearing that recording, the one where Daniel told her I'd already lost him, I stopped sleeping through the night. Not because I was broken, but because my mind wouldn't stop mapping every possible outcome. My husband had built his story about me carefully, brick by brick, and if I wanted to destroy it, I had to be more meticulous than him. I couldn't simply expose his affair. I needed to make sure when he fell, everyone saw who had pushed him. So I began preparing the stage. I started small, controlled. Every morning, I still made coffee, still smiled, still wore the blue robe he liked. I wanted him to feel safe, convinced that I was the same obedient shadow he'd sculpted. He'd walk into the kitchen, plant a kiss on my forehead, and say, "See, things are getting better." I'd smile back, "They are." He never noticed the faint red light of the hidden voice recorder tucked behind the fruit bowl. Over the following weeks, I studied him the way a scientist studies a specimen. His routines, his excuses, his triggers. I learned that he always called Rachel during his lunch break, that he kept a second phone hidden in his car's glove compartment, and that he used a cloud account under her name to store their photos. One night, while he slept, I found it. The passwords were simple, sentimental. The year we met, the date we got married. He never imagined I'd use our history against him. Inside that folder were images that burned through me. Hotel rooms, half-empty wine glasses, his hand on her waist. I didn't cry. I just kept scrolling. Each photo was a confession, and each confession another thread in the net I was weaving. When I closed the laptop, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The dinner. The one he'd never forget. I waited for the perfect occasion, his birthday. He loved attention, especially when he could play the role of the devoted husband in front of friends, colleagues, and family. I told him I wanted to host something special this year to celebrate how far we'd come. His smile was immediate, almost relieved. "That's my girl," he said. I knew we were good again. He had no idea that sentence sealed his fate. I spent the next few days turning the house into a trap disguised as a celebration. The decorations were tasteful, the playlist carefully curated, the wine chosen from his favorite vineyard. I made sure to invite everyone who'd ever believed his version of events, the colleagues who'd pitied him, the relatives who'd told me to take better care of him, the friends who gently suggested therapy. They would all be there when the curtain rose. The morning of the dinner, I rehearsed everything in my head, where I'd stand, how long I'd wait, the exact moment I'd press play. I tested the speakers twice. I hid the phone with the recordings in plain sight, connected to Bluetooth, camouflaged among the decorations. By afternoon, the house smelled like vanilla candles and roasted herbs. I caught my reflection in the mirror as I set the table, calm, deliberate, a woman with nothing left to lose. There was no trace of fear, only a strange stillness. I'd been living in his lie so long that the truth felt almost theatrical. At 6 sharp, he came home with flowers and his trademark grin. "Wow," he said, glancing around. "You went all out." I wanted tonight to be memorable. He kissed my cheek. "You're amazing." "I don't tell you that enough." He meant it, or at least he thought he did. He always believed his own performances. Guests began arriving soon after. Laughter, greetings, the clink of glasses. Daniel was magnetic as always, telling jokes, refilling drinks, wrapping an arm around me for the occasional photo. I played along, matching his energy, laughing at his stories, feeding him lines for his ego. The entire evening was a symphony of deceit, each note played to perfection. Halfway through the dinner, as conversation drifted to memories and milestones, I glanced at the clock. 8:47 p.m. The recording was cued. The phone lay quietly behind the centerpiece, its screen dim but ready. My heart didn't race. It beat steadily, like a countdown. Daniel raised his glass, smiling at the table. "To love," he said, "and to the people who keep us sane." The irony almost made me laugh. Everyone drank, and as the chatter resumed, he turned to me. "You see, this is what I meant. We needed this. A fresh start." I met his gaze, my smile serene. "You're right," I said softly. "A fresh start sounds perfect." He didn't notice my thumb slide across the phone screen under the tablecloth. He didn't notice the faint chime as the speakers connected. The truth was coming, and once it began, there would be no pausing it, no rewinding, no denying it. The mask he'd spent years perfecting was seconds away from disintegrating. The room smelled of wine, perfume, and polished lies. Candles flickered across the table like stage lights, turning every face into part of the performance. I could feel the tension in my chest tightening, but not from fear, from focus. Everything had led to this moment, and I wasn't about to flinch. Daniel was in his element. He'd always thrived in front of an audience, especially when that audience adored him. He leaned back in his chair, telling some story about how we met, polishing the past until it gleamed. "She was the quiet one," he said, smiling at me. "I had to chase her for months." Laughter filled the room. "Now look at us," he added, raising his glass. "Still standing." Still standing. I almost smiled at the irony. I waited until the laughter faded into the low hum of conversation, the perfect white noise to drown a single click. My hand slid beneath the table, found the phone, and tapped play. At first, no one noticed. The speakers filled with faint static, barely louder than the clinking of cutlery. Then, Daniel's voice emerged. Smooth, familiar, unmistakable. "She's starting to suspect again." The room went still. "But she won't do anything," his voice continued. "She's too scared to lose me." A pause, followed by a woman's laugh. "Then stop worrying," Rachel's voice replied. "She's too scared to see the truth." Silence, the kind that empties the air of oxygen. Every head turned toward the speakers, toward him. Daniel froze, his face drained of color, his fingers tightening around the stem of his wine glass until it trembled. What is this?" he stammered. I tilted my head slightly. "You tell me." His friends exchanged glances, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. The audio kept playing, his lies unspooling like a confession he couldn't stop. "I'll meet you after dinner. She's hosting something tomorrow. I'll make an excuse." The laughter that followed on the recording was almost tender. Two people wrapped in the arrogance of secrecy. Across the table, one of his colleagues muttered, "Jesus Christ, Daniel." He stood up suddenly, knocking his chair back. "Turn it off." "No," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You wanted a fresh start, remember? Here it is." He reached across the table for the phone, but I was faster. I rose to my feet, holding it just out of reach. "You spent months telling everyone I was losing my mind," I said, my voice low but clear. "You told them I was paranoid, unstable, imagining things." I took a step closer, every word sharp enough to cut. Turns out, I was just right. The room didn't move. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath. He tried again, softer this time, desperate. "Linda, please, let's talk about this privately." I smiled faintly. "We've done private. You preferred public." The next part of the recording played, his voice again, but now unmistakably intimate. "You make me feel alive. She's just there." Rachel's laugh followed like a blade twisting into flesh. Gasps broke from the guests. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel lunged forward to grab the phone, but one of his colleagues stopped him. "Don't," the man said sharply. "You've done enough." For a moment, Daniel just stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting from face to face. The confident, charming man everyone admired was gone, replaced by something brittle, cornered. "None of you understand," he said finally. "She's manipulating this. She set me up." "Set you up?" I echoed, laughing softly. "You built the trap yourself. I just let you step in." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw recognition, not guilt, not shame, fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing the story you wrote about someone no longer works. The recording ended on his own voice, saying, "She'll never find out." Silence again. Then someone started clapping, slow, reluctant, disbelieving. One of his co-workers, maybe, breaking the tension the only way he knew how. Others followed, awkwardly at first, then louder, until the room was filled with the sound of uncomfortable applause. Daniel's face twisted, humiliation blooming like heat. He turned toward the door, muttering something, but I spoke before he could leave. "You said I was crazy," I said quietly. "You told everyone I needed help." I met his eyes. Turns out I just needed proof. He didn't answer. He just left, shoulders rigid, door slamming behind him. For a long moment, no one moved. Then someone reached out, touched my arm, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." I nodded, but my gaze stayed fixed on the doorway where he'd stood. Because in that silence, something in me shifted. Not relief exactly, but the deep, grounding peace of someone who finally stepped out of a nightmare and realized it was daylight again. And for the first time in months, I felt sane. Entirely, defiantly sane. The next morning felt almost unreal. The house was silent, heavy with the ghost of last night's noise. The wine glasses still stood where they'd been left, fingerprints on crystal, half-melted candles leaning toward each other like tired witnesses. The smell of roasted herbs lingered in the air, mixed with something metallic, the scent of endings. I sat at the table where it all happened, a cup of cold coffee in my hands. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up as if nothing had changed. Sprinklers ticking, dogs barking, sunlight crawling across the blinds. But my world had rearranged itself overnight. I wasn't the trembling, uncertain wife anymore. I was the woman who'd forced truth into daylight. Daniel hadn't come home. His car was gone when I woke up, the garage echoing with emptiness. For a few minutes, I wondered if he'd even try to contact me. But then my phone buzzed. "Daniel, we need to talk. Please. You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I stared at the message, the calmness inside me surprising even myself. I typed back slowly. "Me, you humiliated yourself. I just gave you a microphone." Then I blocked his number. It didn't take long for the aftermath to spread. By noon, half the people who'd been at that dinner had texted me, some with sympathy, some with disbelief. One of his colleagues called just to say, "He's at the office, losing it." Another message came from Rachel. "You didn't have to involve me in your personal breakdown." I almost laughed. The audacity of calling my sanity into question even now. That was their shared language, the one built on denial and arrogance. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The recording was already circulating among their circle, and every replay was another nail in the coffin of Daniel's reputation. By evening, I learned through mutual friends that he'd been put on temporary leave from his firm. His supervisor had called the incident a concerning lapse of judgment. I could almost picture him sitting in that glass-walled office, trying to explain that the story he'd spun about his unstable wife had turned out to be a public confession instead. But justice doesn't arrive as a cinematic crescendo. It creeps in quietly, through consequences. Bills still come, dinner still has to be made, and grief still lingers, even when it's deserved. That night, I ran a bath and sat in the water until it cooled. My reflection rippled, unfamiliar. I thought about how easily people believe charm over truth, how simple it had been for him to weaponize gentleness. And I realized something painful. Gaslighting doesn't destroy you with lies. It destroys you by convincing you your truth doesn't matter. Now it did. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of calm. Reporters never came. No viral headlines. No cinematic confrontation. Just quiet freedom. The kind that hums under your skin when you've survived something you weren't supposed to. Then, on the fourth night, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Headlights cut across the living room wall. My breath caught, not from fear, but from curiosity. I walked to the window. Daniel sat inside the car, staring at the house, hands gripping the steering wheel. He didn't move for almost 10 minutes. Then he stepped out. When I opened the door, he stood there, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. The mask was gone. "Linda," he said, voice cracking, "I just want to talk." I didn't stop him. I wanted to see what version of him had survived the collapse. He ran a hand through his hair. "You destroyed me. Everyone saw that recording. My parents, my boss. You ruined my life." I steadied him, quiet. "You mean you ruined it, and I refused to hide it for you?" He shook his head, disbelief thick in his tone. "You could have told me privately." "Privately?" I repeated, almost amused. "You called me crazy publicly." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand what this has done to me." I met his gaze. "I do. It made you honest for once." He didn't have an answer, only a silence that said everything words couldn't. Finally, he turned, muttering something about lawyers, about reputations, about fixing this. I let him go. The sound of the car engine fading down the street was the closest thing to peace I'd heard in months. When the door closed, I leaned against it and exhaled. The quiet felt clean. My hands were steady. The house, once filled with his voice, now belonged entirely to me. I walked back to the dining table and picked up one of the empty glasses. The rim glimmered under the soft light, faint traces of lipstick still visible. I set it down and whispered, half to myself, half to the universe. "This time the silence belongs to me." In the weeks that followed, Daniel became a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. He didn't disappear. Men like him rarely do. They linger, circling the ruins they created, convinced they can still rebuild them if they just say the right words. But what he didn't understand was that his voice had lost its power. The spell was broken. He started small. Flowers on the porch. Apologies written like business proposals. Structured, strategic, empty. I've been reflecting. We both made mistakes. We can fix this. Each message sounded less like remorse and more like damage control. I didn't answer. I didn't delete them either. I just let them sit there, tiny monuments to his unraveling. Then came the calls. At first, calm and measured. "We need to talk, Linda." Then pleading. "Please, just 5 minutes." Then the inevitable rage. "You think you're better than me? After what you did?" It fascinated me how quickly charm curdled into contempt when it stopped working. The neighbors noticed him too. Once I saw him sitting in his car at the end of the street, staring at the house for an hour. Another time, he left a note tucked into my mailbox. "You can't erase me from your life. You'll regret this." I took a photo of it, filed it with the others, and sent it to my lawyer. His arrogance had always been his weakness. Even his threats were admissions. Meanwhile, his social world, the one he'd built so carefully, began to crumble. His colleagues stopped returning his calls. The firm quietly announced his resignation. Mutual friends kept their distance, unwilling to choose sides publicly, but doing so anyway, through silence. Even Rachel vanished. A contact in his office told me she'd transferred to another branch, effective immediately. Apparently, she'd heard enough recordings to realize her name had become synonymous with humiliation. But none of it brought satisfaction. Not really. Vindication doesn't replace peace. It just clears the noise so you can finally hear your own thoughts again. And those thoughts, at first, were brutal. There were nights when I lay awake wondering how I'd missed the signs for so long, how I'd built my life around someone who treated love like a PR campaign. The self-blame was instinctive, automatic. It took time to understand that manipulation thrives on good intentions, that trusting someone isn't a weakness, it's what they exploit. Therapy helped. So did time. I started taking walks again, rediscovering the quiet streets I'd once avoided out of embarrassment. People still whispered. I could feel it, but the whispers didn't sting anymore. They were just proof that the story had changed, and for once, it wasn't his version being told. Then, one Sunday morning, I saw him again. I was at the farmer's market, sunlight spilling over rows of peaches and flowers, when I caught sight of a man standing a few stalls away. Shoulders slumped, clothes wrinkled, sunglasses doing the poor job of hiding the fatigue. He looked smaller somehow, like the air around him had stopped carrying his weight. He saw me too. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he took a hesitant step forward. "Linda," he said quietly, "you look good." I studied him, the man who'd once rewritten my reality and sold it as truth. There was something tragic about seeing him stripped of his charm, reduced to his real self. "I am good," I said simply. He nodded, the faintest twitch of a smile breaking through, as if he wanted to believe I was leaving a door open, but I wasn't. There were no doors left. Only walls rebuilt stronger than before. As he turned away, disappearing into the crowd, I felt something unexpected. Not hatred, not relief, but finality. The kind that doesn't come with fireworks or closure speeches. Just a quiet acknowledgement. It's over. That evening, back home, I opened the folder on my computer, the one labeled Proof, hundreds of files, recordings, screenshots, photos. I hovered over it for a long time, then hit delete. Watching them vanish, one by one, felt like exhaling after holding my breath for a year. Because the truth had already done its job. It didn't need to live in my house anymore. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen the same way it used to when life was still kind. I poured coffee into a single mug, mine, and sat by the window listening to the city wake up. No lies, no noise, no explanations. Just quiet. And this time, it wasn't the kind that comes before a storm. It was the kind that follows it. Freedom didn't arrive as a grand epiphany. It came slowly, like sunlight creeping across a floor that had spent too long in shadow. For months, my life moved in fragments. Mornings of silence, afternoons of rebuilding routines, nights when the weight of everything I'd endured finally dissolved into exhaustion instead of panic. Healing, I learned, wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, and maybe that was the point. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the house felt without his presence, not the suffocating quiet that used to fill it when he ignored me. This was different. This was peace disguised as emptiness. I started doing small things again, things I'd once given up because they took too much time. Reading in the kitchen, painting my nails, cooking dinner just for myself, playing music too loud, leaving dishes in the sink because no one was coming home to critique them. Every act of defiance was also an act of healing. I sold the dining table, the same one where his lies had finally died, and replaced it with a smaller one, round and simple. The first evening I ate there alone, I set a single candle in the middle and let the wax run down its sides until it pooled, like melted guilt. I didn't need 12 chairs anymore. I needed space that fit the truth. My phone stopped buzzing after a while. The people who had once whispered behind my back slowly shifted their curiosity towards someone else's drama. That's how the world works. It moves on. But I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by someone else's story. I was finally writing my own, even if it started in silence. I picked up running again. At first, I could barely manage a mile before my chest ached. But each day I went a little farther, the rhythm of my feet syncing with the thought that I had survived. On those morning runs, I passed couples walking dogs, teenagers rushing for buses, an old man watering his garden. No one knew me. No one cared. And somehow, that anonymity felt sacred. Sometimes, I'd catch myself thinking about him, not with longing, but with a kind of detached curiosity, like revisiting an old movie whose ending no longer hurts because you already know it. I wondered if he ever replayed that dinner in his mind, if he could still hear the echo of his own voice confessing through my speakers. Maybe. But it didn't matter. His story had ended where mine began. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I found a box of our wedding photos. I sat on the floor, flipping through them one by one. Two people frozen in optimism, unaware of the wreckage waiting down the road. My first instinct was to throw them away. Instead, I put them back in the box, closed the lid, and wrote a single word across it. Was. Then I carried it to the basement and left it there, among things that no longer served me. By spring, the house had transformed. Light reached corners that once felt dim, walls repainted in soft tones, windows open again. I even adopted a cat, a rescue with cautious eyes and a habit of sitting exactly where the sunlight was warmest. We understood each other without needing to speak. Both a little wary, both learning to trust quiet again. And then, one morning, as I stood by the window with coffee in hand, I realized I couldn't remember the sound of his voice anymore, not clearly anyway. It had blurred, faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of my own breath. That's when I knew the healing was real, when the echo stopped chasing me. Later that day, I met an old friend for lunch, someone who drifted away during the chaos but reached out afterward, hesitant, apologetic. We talked for hours, not about him, but about books, music, travel, ordinary things. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't a triumphant laugh. It was soft, human, alive. On the way home, the sky turned gold, the kind of light that makes everything look temporary, but beautiful. I rolled the window down, let the wind tangle my hair, and thought, this is what coming back to yourself feels like. Not revenge, not victory. Just freedom. Quiet, earned, and finally mine. People like to romanticize closure, as if it arrives wrapped in clarity and grace. It doesn't. Closure is quieter than that. It comes when you stop needing an apology that will never sound sincere. When you stop checking the door, expecting footsteps that no longer belong to you. It comes when you realize you don't want revenge anymore, just peace, and maybe a good night's sleep. Months after everything, the story that once consumed me now felt like a chapter in a book I'd already finished. I no longer replayed that dinner in my head, no longer wondered what he told people afterward. Maybe he spun another story. Maybe this time he painted himself as the victim. Let him narrate. The truth didn't need my defense anymore. It had already been witnessed. I started keeping a journal again, not to document pain, but to remember the ordinary. The smell of rain on the pavement. The sound of my neighbor's radio drifting through the window. The small kindness of strangers. Healing wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about learning to exist in the present without flinching. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch with the cat curled beside me, the city humming softly in the background. I'd think about all the versions of myself I'd been, the woman who doubted her own memory, who apologized for asking questions, who confused manipulation for love. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her one thing. You were never crazy for noticing the truth. You were just surrounded by people too invested in pretending it wasn't there. The lies he told about me used to define how others saw me, paranoid, unstable, dramatic. But here's what they never understood. Sometimes the only way to stay sane is to stop agreeing to someone else's version of reality. Sanity isn't about keeping the peace. It's about refusing to drown quietly. I began speaking about it, not on social media or to feed gossip, but in quiet conversations with women who'd lived something similar. The recognition in their eyes was always the same. Relief that someone finally said it out loud. That's the secret power of truth. Once it's spoken, it doesn't go back to sleep. Eventually, people stopped asking about him altogether. The silence around his name wasn't forced. It was natural, like forgetting the smell of a storm once the air clears. I didn't forgive him, not in the traditional sense. Forgiveness implies reconciliation, and I didn't want that. What I wanted, and what I found, was distance. A year after it all ended, I sold the house. The day before I left, I stood in the dining room one last time. The walls were bare now, the floor shining from a fresh polish. The same place where he once called me crazy had become just another room, stripped of meaning. I whispered a quiet thank you, not to him, but to the woman who'd refused to break, who had turned humiliation into clarity. Then I closed the door and didn't look back. Now, when people ask me if I'd do it all again, if I'd still press play knowing the chaos it would cause, I don't hesitate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Because sometimes the only way to rebuild your life is to let it collapse first. Truth has a way of surviving the wreckage, so do the people who tell it. And if you've ever been made to feel crazy for noticing what's right in front of you, this is for you. You're not crazy. You're awake. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.